Hello and welcome back. In today's video, I will share the steps I usually apply to a portrait photo. Applying these steps will transform this image into this. Let's get started. Before applying the steps, I will remove the finished layer. So the first thing I usually do is to check the RGB parade in the Scopes panel. If you can't find the Scopes panel, make sure you enable it from the View Studio Scopes menu. Once in the Scopes panel, you can switch to RGB parade using the Mode drop-down and selecting RGB parade. I will add a curves adjustment layer, which will allow me to adjust the RGB parade. Let's also give it a name so we remember later what this curves layer is exactly doing. One thing I notice is that the bottom of the parade is hitting the minimum line. I always like to leave a little bit of slack space here. If I move the shadows point in a curves a bit to the top, you notice we get this extra space in the RGB parade. I will also do the same for the top levels of the parade by lowering the highlights a little bit down. Now, if you look closely, the blue parade is a bit out of sync. So let's fix that by modifying the blue channel and lowering the bottom part a bit. Nice! We now have a more balanced image. Let's have a look at the before and see what our adjustment did. It's a subtle difference, but it made the image a tiny bit warmer. As I zoom in, you see the effect a bit better. Next step is to work on the skin colors. We can use the vector scope for this in the Scopes panel by changing the mode to vector scope. The vector scope is a tool which allows you to see how the colors are distributed. As we will be using this for the skin color, I'm going to create a simple mask by creating a rectangle and use this rectangle as a temporary mask. Now that I have predominantly the skin color showing in the canvas, we can have a look at the vector scope. For a good natural looking skin color, you want the colors to be on this diagonal line between the red and the yellow. If we look at our vector scope, you notice the colors are already on this line, but half of it is between the blue and the cyan. So the idea is to push the colors towards the red and the yellow while trying to stay on the line. An easy way of doing this is by using a color balance adjustment. First, let's turn on Preserve Luminosity. In the midtones, let's crank up the reds. You notice how the vector scope has reacted to this. We're slowly getting to the area where we want to be. Let's also do the same for the shadows. If you look closely to the vector scope now, you see that there has been a tilt towards the red, which makes sense as we added quite a bit of red. I can add a bit of yellow to correct this tilt. Okay, this looks about right. Let's close this dialog and give the layer a name. Let me disable the mask on the original image so we can see its effect on the whole image. Looks pretty nice. Let's turn it off and on and see the difference. As expected, it made the image warmer and in a sense gave it a bit more natural look. The next step is adding some contrast. I usually do this with a curves layer, which I apply as a soft light. After applying the soft light, just fine-tune it until you get a nice contrast that feels good to you. Again, as with all the steps I'm applying, turning it off and on gives you an idea whether it works or not. If the effect is too much, you can always lower its opacity. But I think this looks good. Next step is to work on the background. As the background is quite bright, first thing I want to do is to flatten it. By adding a curves layer and moving up the shadows and lowering the highlights. This of course applies to the whole image, so I will need to apply a mask for it. After I added the mask, I will paint with black on the areas I don't want this to be applied, which is the model. For the sake of time, I'm just masking in a very quick and dirty way, but you can also use other methods to mask the background in much better detail. To help see how good the mask is, I will increase the effect of the curves layer and fix the mask quickly. Excellent. Now we have a more flattened background, but this also made it less colorful. So I'm going to add another curves layer and play with the different channels. I just want to keep the blues and the greens. This looks awful, but if I change the blend mode to soft light, it gives a nice effect. After I change the blend mode to soft light, I can fine-tune it, so I get a nice fitting background colors. The effect is maybe too much, but as mentioned, in this case, just lower the opacity. Perfect. Time to work on the model. First, let's make the lips more red. I will use a channel mixer, which will increase the red. And then modify the blend range so it only applies to the darker areas. As this applies to the whole image, I will invert its mask using Command I and then put the blend mode to multiply. Now I can paint in the lips with a white brush and finally adjust the channel mixer to get the exact look I'm aiming for. Next area of attention is the hair. This will be a two-step process. First, I'm going to add a curves layer which darkens the hair. As with the lips, I will invert its mask and paint the effect back on the hair. To make sure I don't darken the brighter areas, I will modify the blend range in a way that the highlights are not affected. Next step for the hair is to add highlights. This is the opposite of just what we did. We can add a curves layer which brightens, then invert the mask and paint in the shines in the hair. Let's have a look at the before and the after. Pretty cool. Also remember that we can modify the blend range of the highlights layer, so it only affects the bright areas we painted on. Great! Next, some quick face retouching. On a new layer, I will use the healing brush to clean up the face. Just make sure your healing brush is using current layer and below. I will go a bit extreme here as I'm working on a separate layer. Once finished, I can lower its opacity so the retouching looks more natural. That looks about right. Let's zoom out and see the before and the after. I feel the neck area still needs a bit more work, so I'll add another pixel layer and use the healing brush to fix the neck area again. I can then fine-tune the strength with the opacity. Let's name the layers before moving on. I'm going to add a curves layer to fix the brightness, especially on the skin. That looks okay. Next, let's lighten the eyes by adding a curves layer and making sure with the built-in mask that it only applies to the eyes. Now, I want to add some contrast to it. An interesting way is by using a gradient adjustment which goes from black to white. If we put the blend range of it to overlay, we get indeed this very strong contrasty image. But this is not what I'm looking for. By changing the blend range to a U shape, you get this very nice contrast. You can adjust the blend range as you like. For example, a W shape can also get good results. Moving on to the next step, which is boosting the highlights. Let's add a curves layer again and set its blend mode to color dodge. The effect is way too much, but if we change the curve and then adjust the blend range to a V shape, we get this amazing result. Let's zoom in and see its effect. Pretty awesome. While zoomed in, I noticed that probably the eye color of the model is not correct. Let me go to the original image and copy it. I will then paste it to the top, remove the mask and then enable it. If we look closely, the eyes have a blue-greenish color. However, after our adjustments, it looks more brownish. To fix that, let me add a curves layer and increase the blues. Before continuing with the eye correction, let me mask the curves layer so it only affects the eyes. Also, let's change the blend range so it only applies to the shadows. Now with the curves, I can adjust the eye color until I have the original eye color back. Let's also lower its opacity. That looks about right. Let's compare with what we started and what we have. I think it looks amazing, especially as I was aiming for a more natural color. Optionally, I can lower the brightness on the background a bit, so our subject gets a bit more attention. I can do that by adding a color balance and adjusting in a way that the background gets a bit more purplish bluish color. As this applies to the whole image, I need to mask it to the background. Luckily, I can copy and paste the mask from the previous adjustments. As you can see, the background is now a bit out of sync with the subject color. I will adjust the color balance so it looks a bit more natural. But remember, the idea was not to recolor the background, but to darken it, so I will set its blend mode to multiply. That suits much better, except the applied mask, which I'm going to fix in a minute. But let's lower the opacity of it first. Okay, let's fix the mask. As this layer darkens the image, I can also use it to darken parts of our subject to get that extra depth. As you notice, the effect is too much for the face, so I will lower the opacity of the brush and then try again. That looks about right. There we have it, our final end result. I hope you learned something new along the way and has given you some insights how to retouch a portrait photo. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Keep safe and keep being creative. Until the next video.